Legally speaking, my name is James Coleman, but I prefer to go by Geordy Coleman. It's a nickname my grandfather gave me when I was like weeks old, maybe a month old. So I really like that name a lot. Also makes me kind of unique because it's spelled differently than how most people would assume it's spelled. Uh, Currently I'm a cook, but hopefully I'll be pursuing my dream of stand-up comedy. And when I was like 16 years old, I had a friend. He used to hold house parties. He was in a heavy metal band, and he used to hold house parties in his basement. And he had it all set up: microphones, amplifiers, big ass drum kit. And he started trying to showcase his band. This was in high school. I was about 16 at the time. And he invited a bunch of people over. His band only had about probably a 30 to 45 minute set. And after they were done, everybody was just kind of like sitting around going like, well, what do we do now? And he kind of looked at me like, can you do something? So I just walked up on stage and started telling jokes. Yeah, that started it, and that kind of, it's like a bug that bitches, like, it's like, stand-up comedy, I try to explain it to people, stand-up comedy in a sense is kind of like a disease that you just never quite get over. Ideally, in a perfect world, what I'd love to do is create like a promotions thing to help independent artists get a larger audience. Comedy is a good place to start with that just because you need so little to do comedy. You need a stage and a microphone, and if you have a club, chances are they have a stage and a microphone. And all you need to do is learn how to deliver material, learn how to write material, and that's, you know, the simplest way. But ideally, I'd love to work with people that do all different types of art forms. I love hearing laughter. I think what would make it understandable to how it feels to me personally is imagine if you're in a really big band and you're playing like your number one hit song and the whole crowd is singing that song. That's what me telling a great joke and hearing the entire crowd laugh. That's what it really feels like. And in all honesty, a big part of it is an addiction. You get addicted to that laughter, that sound, that feeling, that adrenaline rush. If you can make a few bucks doing it, why the hell not, you know? Oh, my grandfather was, in many ways, my grandfather was the person who made me who I am today. But he definitely was the person who instilled my love with comedy. All things comedy, but especially stand-up comedy. When I was really young, probably between 4 and 7 years old, he used to listen to Bill Cosby, like old vinyl Bill Cosby records. And my grandfather always had a joke. It didn't matter what time of day it was, didn't matter. He was always somebody you go to, and it's like, I kind of feel kind of crappy today. You have a joke, you know, just pick me up kind of thing. And he could always find a joke. He instilled a big part of my sense of humor. My mom influenced it a bit too, just because my mom, she had a very more dry sense of humor, I guess would be the appropriate. She was British but born in Canada would be the best way to describe her sense of humor. Sometimes it was so dry and sarcastic you weren't even sure if she was actually telling a joke or not. Before I was 6 months old, my father left my mom without actually even saying anything. My mom didn't think it was a separation of any kind because my father was a truck driver. So it wasn't unusual for him to be gone for even a couple months at a time. And it wasn't until she got a phone call when he'd been gone for about a month and a half or so. A friend of hers called her and was like, so you realize John's living with somebody else? and my mom was really confused about what she was trying to say. Like, she kind of knew, but she had a hard time wrapping her head around it. My grandfather gave me a lot of guidance. So, I do have a little bit of resentment left over from my father, but for the most part, I think I've kind of made peace with a lot of things because I know for a fact that if he had been around, I'd be a totally different person. I think with most entertainers, there'll come a point where you write something and you have this doubt and this worry that it's not going to be as good as you think it is. A lot of people talk about having stage fright, which is not something that hits me every time on stage. I wouldn't even say stage fright really hits me all that much, but you have different levels where you have, like, I refer to as material fright, I touched upon earlier, where it's like you always have this fear that the crowd isn't going to accept the bit, or different crowds will react differently to different types of material and different senses of humor. And so that becomes a factor of it. A lot of comedians do suffer with depression. And for the most part, a lot of comedians are damaged people. Like, they've had some sort of traumatic event in their life. And obviously I talked about my father and stuff like that. And I've gone through, like, abusive relationships and things like that. And so, most people are well aware of, like, Robin Williams committed suicide because of depression. Even comedians that you don't think of having different issues have a lot of issues. Being a comedian is absolutely exhausting, especially if you have a job on top of working as a comedian. But even if you're just a comedian, you still have this. There's times you have to wake up super early, do an interview for a radio station because you're going to be performing that week in the city. If you have a job, of course you have to work your 9 to 5 job or whatever your hours are for your job. Then afterwards, go home, maybe do some writing. Then you have to perform. Then you have to wake up again. And most comedians will tell you, once you perform, you're not going to sleep right after. It is the biggest jolt of adrenaline you can possibly get. Time for the simplest fire eating trick. As every cook knows, Ross, no matter how hot something is, do not drop it. Here's one of my favorite tricks. And this is the reason why you wear jeans while you're doing this, by the way. Yeah. You're a madman. Do a couple of fire transfers now for you. Now, if you thought that was crazy, here's my favorite fire transfer. Burp my beard there.
What for?
Oh, those two are separating. There you go.
Hey everybody, thank you very much. How you guys doing tonight?
Good.
And we've hit the night section of the I know what you guys are thinking. Let me get this out of the way so you can see me better. I know what you guys are thinking. A lot of people will say I look like certain people. Sometimes I get, hey, you look like Horatio from CSI Miami on year 2 of disability. One time I got, you look like Triple H if you hated diet and exercise. My favorite one, though, is you look like Discount Jesus. Yes, he sells bread from Walmart. I actually saw an evangelist for the first time in a long time. How many people, do you guys know what an evangelist is? Effectively, they're panhandlers for Jesus. And I was whatever your faith is, you know these guys are at least a little bit full of crap. You're wearing nice suits, nice shoes, you know. I'd rather give money to a guy that looks like me. Just sitting there with a hat, yeah, Jesus. That was too far, we're gonna have a good time. But you know, they're just a little bit full of crap. But I started thinking, could you imagine, just for a moment, that Jesus came back, wanted to cash in all the money that these guys were collecting on his behalf? They just be on stage doing their thing, and all of a sudden they're like, Jesus Christ! And he's like, yeah, all that money? Might want to sell that car. So, it's funny, this is one of the few places that I see that still has plastic straws. Yeah, most places have converted to paper because paper works really well when it's wet. And you see, I've seen people going into places like Starbucks and Timmy's with metal straws. This is the weirdest one. I've literally seen a person, I've seen this in stores, they have spaghetti straws. Why? Like, look, I love turtles, I have one. But you know what's a better alternative than all that crap? This. But apparently somebody decided that was too much work. You guys are a great crowd. You are. From all the crowds I've ever had, you guys are definitely the most recent. So, you guys, you know what? We have a magician coming up. We have some great talent coming up. Do you guys mind, in honor of our magician and everything, do you guys mind if I do a quick magic trick? No? All right. I think I just heard somebody say no, because I think they know what trick I'm going to All right. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a 3-inch nail. I know it's a 3-inch nail. I know it's 3 inches because it's the same length as a particular part of my body. Finger. Your brain's made that one dirty. Now, anybody here doubts that this is a real nail, by all means come up and take a look. Anybody? Everybody's good? Okay. Now this is the reason why I asked if anybody wanted to see it beforehand. Because you don't want to see it afterwards, right? This would probably be a bad time to sneeze, eh? How did Jim lose his eye? A comedian sneezed. So. It's funny when I do this trick, a lot of people kind of think that I enunciate a little too well. Like they're expecting me to be like, my favorite color is 7. No more peanuts for me, Stuart. I feel like my dad. You know, this trick really does give me a headache, and I'm never sure why. All right, before I get out of here, I'm going to pull this out of my face. Anybody want a souvenir? Before I get out of here, I am going to say there's something that I've been thinking a lot about, and you know, people who want to get sex change operations, that's fine. But I have 2 things about that. Number 1, can we agree that people should wait until they're 18? That, like, at least wait until your brain's mostly developed? Because the thing is I wouldn't let an 8-year-old pick out their own outfit. I'm not going to let them pick their own gender. And I can tell you this much too. When I was 10 years old, I thought pogs were cool. For those of you who don't know what pogs are, my point exactly. The other thing is I don't think a man should be classified as a woman until he cuts his dick off.
Yep.
Just because men are messed up, because first of all, I met guys who pretend to be gay that aren't actually gay. Because they forget women don't think like men. Because when a man meets a lesbian, he has a thought that goes, I can change her. Or if he meets a lesbian couple, it's, maybe I will be the one invited into the threesome. Women meet a gay man and it's cool, somebody I can go shopping with. All right, you guys have been great. Have a great night. Take it easy.
Geordy Coleman, everybody.
I think a lot of people feel that way, where life feels very dull and repetitive. You know, get up, shower, go to work, come home, have dinner, go to bed, get up, repeat, 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 until infinity and beyond. And then, but you start kind of taking, in a way it's like taking inventory of your life, where you start looking at the characters in your life that you've made, whether it's friends or coworkers or stuff like that. There's actually a bit I'm working on about working in a kitchen. It's like, working in a kitchen's interesting because you work with some of the most unique people. As you have alcoholics, drug addicts, smokers, people on probation, people just getting off probation, people hoping that probation's what they get, people who don't see their kids, people who can't see their kids. And those are the nice ones. You know? So, it really becomes, like, anybody's life could be reflected through an art form, whether it's comedy, whether it's drawing, painting, music, whatever. And it's kind of just take an inventory, and you can kind of find weird things in your life, even as normal as your life may seem, as dull and as boring and as dragging as your life may be. There are some really interesting parts to everybody's life.